social media is the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. People feel more vulnerable because they don't know what's going to happen with anything they have shared with somebody else.
How can we increase authentic connection in the online world?
The Vegas rule is what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We can share what we said, but you can't share what anybody else said.
Dr. Carole Robin, former faculty director at Stanford, co-founder of Leaders in Tech, has been helping leaders grow for over 35 years.
She co-authored the award-winning book Connect and was featured in Forbes' 50 Future of Work list.
Why should somebody follow you? If you want to be a good leader, you're going to have to be appropriately vulnerable. Good leaders are good learners. And you cannot be a good learner if you're not curious. Being curious is admitting you don't know. But my students used to say, but Carole, the minute I'm outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? So we came up with this. Feelings and emotions are the bedrock of strong relationships.
Something we have just somehow learned to shut off and suppress and move on. And it's just cost us so much, inner peace, relationships, sanity, all of that. Well, I love what we're talking about today because your work revolves around human connection. And I love human connection. It's one of the biggest passionate areas of interest.
Yes.
And I mean, the work you do, Carole, is so much of a high priority because like human connection obviously forms the foundation of fulfillment and what gives meaning to our lives. And which has somehow got lost as times have evolved, or should I say devolved, in
Yes,
terms of how we're living.
yes.
So,
And
I mean,
especially during COVID,
yes.
because as we all went to, Zoom and Hollywood Squares, that's an old show in the United States. What happened was task got more and more foregrounded and relationship got more and more backgrounded.
Yes.
And so it's even worse than it's ever been.
Yeah. And it's funny because even when families were, what's the word, like confined in a space together, there was so much of conflict. You hear this all the time in news articles and just Instagram stories or whatever. And it just shows that on this level, there is so much work to be done. And that's where I guess your expertise comes in. So thank you for doing all that you do. And I'm curious, like when you first started this work, what did you notice about the world that made you gravitate towards exploring or diving deeper into human connection and deepening interpersonal dynamics?
Well, there's a couple of different answers to that because
Yeah.
I fell into this work in sort of pieces. It wasn't like this very straight. It wasn't like a light bulb went off and suddenly, oh, this is my life's work.
Yeah.
That makes a good story, but it's not the true story. So, the first thing that happened was that I had spent 10 years in sales and marketing and industrial automation, and I was in a business that was, to say very male dominated is an understatement. I was the only woman in a non-clerical job. And I had been um, very well taught, I guess, or indoctrinated would be a better word,
Mhm.
to leave emotions and feelings in the parking lot. There's no place in business for feelings. And, that served me initially, and then it cost me. Because by the time I became a 13 Western state manager and I had a lot of people working for me, and I was at an offsite with, and I tell this story often, I was at an offsite with actually, they were still men, but I finally fixed that. But at that time of this anecdote, they were still men. There were six guys who reported to me. And I got a little excited, and I wasn't getting much, and I got a little more excited. And one of the guys leaned in and said, "God, Carole, are you gonna is that water in the corner of your eye? Are you gonna cry?" Then he said, "What? Are you like human after all?
What's that to do with being human? I'm
Are
confused.
you human after all?" And then I burst out crying. I said, "You don't think I'm human?" I said, "I don't think there's anything more important for us all to talk about than that." And then we spent 2 days talking about who we were, why we were there, what we wanted from each other, what we needed from each other. And that's when we became a team. That I to this day believe that was the day I became a leader. And the fact is that if I had done that 10 years earlier when I first got hired, I would have never ended up a big time manager because I would have burst out crying and they would have said, "Oh, just another emotional woman." And then it would just fed the stereotype that there's no place in business for feelings. Well, so that was kind of the first inkling I had that
Mm.
something was off with business.
The way things were done in the business world, yeah.
The norms in business, there was something not quite right. Then I had several careers. I've had 6 different careers, even though I taught at Stanford for almost 20 years. I'm not a career academic. I had lots of different careers, and eventually I decided that I wanted to go into industrial automation. I mean, I wanted to go into organization development and especially executive coaching. And then I thought, I don't want to be leadership development was my area of interest. And I thought, I don't want to mess with people's lives and not have more education, because I was halfway through a
Mm.
master's in chemistry when I decided I wasn't going to be a chemist. So I decided to go back to school and get a master's in organization development. Then I decided that wasn't going to be enough. So I decided to get a PhD. That gives you a little bit of a window into me. And so when I was in my PhD program, one of my PhD advisors, as I was finishing my PhD, said, Carole, you should go over to Stanford and talk to my colleague and friend David Bradford. He teaches a course called Interpersonal Dynamics over at Stanford. You'd be terrific. And I was like, okay, well, sure, that sounds like kind of fun. So I went over to meet David Bradford. And at the time, I had joined a consulting firm, and I was traveling all over the world. And David and I, got to know each other. And he said, would you like to teach 1/4 of this course a year? Because I think you'd be great. I went through some training with them, and so I went to my partners and I said, I think I want to do this. I'm going to teach 1/4 a year of this course. It's called Touchy Feely by the students, and
Well, that's what
emphasis.
they call it. That's what
That's
they
what
call
they
the
call it.
course.
That's what they
I
call the
love
course.
touchy
Emphasis on
feely.
the feely, not the touchy. Okay,
Yeah,
just to be clear.
got it.
Um, so my partner said, "Well, sure. What panache to have one of our partners be faculty at Stanford Business School." So they said, "No problem." I was like, 1/4 a year, I can't travel. So then I started teaching touchy feely, and then I just thought, "Oh, this is what I was put on the planet to do."
That is such a journey. Damn. Wow.
Because one of the things that happened to me, Sakun, was that I started to see, like, viscerally experience what was happening to these students as it's almost like, when you've got a safe and you've been trying to crack it, and then all of a sudden it clicks and you open the door. I kept having that experience over and over and over again with my students who were like, "Oh, that's what's been wrong with my relationship with my parents. Oh, that's what's been wrong with my relationship with my sister. Oh, that's why my former boss was such a miserable person." Oh, and so it turned out it was, yes, it's at the business school because, as I think you noted, people do business with people. And so the business school recognized this as a really important set of skills to be able to learn how to develop strong, robust relationships.
Mm.
But what was really gratifying to me was it was also, to where you started the conversation, it was starting to unfold for my students as a much more fulfilling and meaningful life. They were suddenly equipped with
Mm.
so many tools that they'd never had to build relationships or to repair relationships that had gone terribly wrong somewhere along the way and had no tools.
Gosh.
Because no matter how good you are, you're going to end up with some relationships that go sideways. So not only do you want to be armed with ways to maybe do the most that you can to avoid that, but it's also good to have tools to repair.
Yeah.
And
And
whoever teaches us that?
so, what were the key principles that you were focusing on that became so transformative for these students of yours?
Well, they translate into the 6 characteristics of an exceptional relationship that we talk about in the book. So David Bradford, the guy who originally, my mentor and who brought me to Stanford, and I were approached by Penguin Random House in 2017, and they said, "So how come there's this class that thousands of students for decades have said was worth the entire price of tuition, and there's no book?" We said, because you don't learn about this
It's
from a book.
experiential.
You
Yeah.
actually have to engage with other people. And they said, well, how are you okay with the only people getting to learn this being those that are privileged enough and lucky enough to go to the Stanford Business School? And that's when we looked at each other and said, well, I guess we're going to have to write a book. So we wrote Connect. And when we started to write it, we were like, okay, so what is happening in this class? It was your question. What are these students? What are they learning? Because we just knew that we'd been doing something that was, we knew what the results were. And so we had to back up and really unpack what was happening. And what we landed on was 6 characteristics of a relationship as it moves down this continuum. First of all, we identified this continuum. At one end, there's contact and no connection. Those are your thousands of Facebook friends and your 10,000 TikTok friends. Those are not relationships.
I
I
know you
don't
have
care
very
what.
strong views against social media. We'll talk about that as well.
Yeah. And they're not connections, okay? Not the way I define connection.
They're metrics. That's all they are. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Also at that end is dysfunction, just plain old dysfunction. At the other end of the continuum is what we came to call exceptional. But along the way, there is robust and functional. You don't have to get all the way to exceptional to just get to robust and functional is enough in many, many cases. And then you can always decide, well, I want to put in a little extra effort to get to exceptional with this person. But first, you got to know how to get off of contact, no connection, or dysfunction. And so as we started to figure out what happens as you move down this continuum, we identified these 6 characteristics and the skills that are associated with those. So the first 3 characteristics have to do with being more known to each other, i.e., I have to allow myself to be more known by you, and I have to find ways to encourage you to be more known by me.
The
And all of
vulnerability.
that involves disclosure and vulnerability and a willingness to allow ourselves to be more known. And that requires trust and believing that the other person won't use what you have told them against you. So that's a summary of the first 3 characteristics. And the second 3 characteristics have to do with being honest with each other and learning to raise and resolve conflicts productively, because you're not going to have a relationship where there's going to be no conflict ever, unless you never talk to each other. So it's about how do you raise a conflict, something that is even a potential conflict before it becomes a really big conflict. That's why we talk about something called pinches in the book instead of crunches. And then also being invested in each other's learning and growth. And so if I'm going to give you feedback on a behavior you engage in that is causing distance with me, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, it's making me feel distant from you, or making me feel less inclined to want to spend time with you, or less motivated to help you. Which, by the way, we're back to, why is this important in business? How do you inspire anybody without any feelings? How do you motivate anybody without any feelings? So the second 3 characteristics have to do with being honest and giving feedback and resolving conflicts productively. But what they all have in common, and the reason the course is called Touchy-Feely by the students, is that feelings and emotions are the bedrock of strong relationships.
Something we have just somehow learned to shut off and suppress and move on. And it's just cost us so much, inner peace,
So much.
relationships, sanity, all of that.
And you know what's really sad, Sakun? If I had my career to do all over again, if I knew now if I knew when I was 30 what I know now, I would have gone into education. In fact, early education, because watch little kids sometimes. They are very good at this. They are, if they're hurt, they say they're hurt.
Yes, I've always felt that. It's so true. Emotion EQ is very high for them in the sense they express themselves very
It's
explicitly.
very natural. They don't know, if we end up talking about what it means to be over the net, which is one of the big mistakes that people make when they give each other feedback. Little kids don't know how to do that. They don't even know that that exists. They just know you did this and I didn't like it. And this is what's going to happen as a result, which is very clean. And then you know what we do? We socialize that out of them. We teach them to make attributions, to impute motives, to make up stories about other people, it's like, what a disservice to humanity. We actually socialize these really fundamental EQ traits out of them. So
Exactly.
it's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, this is so my space because I also very much into like helping people navigate through conflict constructively because that's where so many people lose the game because they just like get engaged in blame, anger, outrage,
Right.
not taking responsibility because it's so scary to do that. Like they're just like, how can I even do this? Like how can I put
Yes.
myself out there? And that's where the work lies, what you teach. So that's fantastic.
Well, in fact, what you just said was all those anger and blame, those are all distancing
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah.
They're emotions, but they are distancing. Whereas emotions and feelings like care and trust um, and even vulnerability, hurt, sadness, those are all connecting emotions. But boy, have we been socialized never to express those. Except what? Look what happens on TikTok when anybody expresses vulnerability. Whew, blows up, goes viral.
Or they get cancelled, one or the other.
One or the other. That's true.
Yeah. But do you think like it's always been a bit of an issue for us, like human vulnerability has been a bit of a taboo, or it's gotten worse since your time when you were growing up? What do you
Yes.
think has happened? Has it gone worse?
I think, well, now we're into maybe the part of why I think social media is the worst thing that ever happened to humanity.
I agree in that
Um,
sense.
what I think is the reason it's gotten, yes, I think it's gotten worse. I think people feel more vulnerable because they don't know what's going to happen with anything they have shared with somebody else.
Yeah,
And because the opportunity for somebody else to do something not very nice with something that I've shared with them
true.
makes me more afraid, especially because it doesn't matter whether what I said was what I said, because you can take a little bit of what I said, take it completely out of context,
Mm,
and go to town. And now, that's not how I want to be seen. If you told everybody everything I said then that'd be okay. But most people don't. They take bits of what I've said and they use it to make a point they want to make, and not always in the way that I'd want them to make it.
true.
That's why the only social media I am on is LinkedIn.
Even that's becoming a bit like Facebook now, but different
Exactly.
story. But
Exactly. And in fact, I'm about to just say, forget that.
But the challenge is though that like this is very much a part of our reality. Not going to go anywhere. It's a part of our future.
Oh, yeah.
So, what would you say is how can we increase authentic connection in the online world? Because we can't let go of that. It's a part of our world and our lives.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we have to let go of it. But I do think that in the same way that early on people had so much fear about being vulnerable in person, right?
Mm,
And saying something that you would then go tell somebody else that I said. Um, I think if we could create better norms in virtual communication online, then we could do the same thing that we have learned to do in person, which is have an understanding that what I've shared with you is between you and me. So let me give you an example, a couple of examples. So in the leaders, I left Stanford I guess in 2017, and I started Leaders in Tech, which is a nonprofit that is for founders and CEOs in tech. It's basically the Carole Robin curriculum brought to founders in tech. And um, and so many of them have started up their companies while we were in the pandemic, and many of them have executive teams that don't live in the same city. Everything is virtual. Well, not virtual, but everything is online. So what they have learned to do is take all of the stuff they learned at Leaders in Tech about creating stronger relationships and bring them into their meetings, even though they're all online. So the same norm that applies if they were all in person, which is, I call it the Vegas rule. The Vegas rule is what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? If we're all together, then you could talk among yourselves as to what anybody said, but you can't talk outside this room to anybody that was not in this meeting about what somebody said in this meeting. We
Yeah.
can share what we said, but you can't share what anybody else said. And they have the same norm when they meet online. There's no reason why you can't. But you see, if we had some of these basics and foundations in place before everything went online, we'd be better off. But since we didn't even have it before we went online, it's even worse online. And so now it's even harder to try to introduce them.
Yeah, I think people have just become so much more lazier because, like, you know, how we'll just send reactions instead of actual responses. That gets to me so much. It's just like, this needs actual response. Stop saying a heart, stop giving me a heart or a laughing face or whatever, because you can do
Yeah,
more than that. That's where we've lost that, just
right.
going deeper, you know, with each other. And yeah,
Right. You're right, because now think about this for a moment. Emojis were invented because we needed a way to express feelings,
yeah,
right? But when you just when you just put a little heart in, it's
yeah,
meaningless.
it is.
If you have a message after which you have put in the heart, then the heart is in the context.
It's complementary. Yeah. My point, exactly. So, how receptive are leaders in tech or in business these days to, you know, the touchy-feely concept or opening up with vulnerability? I'm so curious about this.
Well, I want to start by saying I probably have a very skewed view. Because people who end up at my doorstep have self-selected to end up at my doorstep.
I guess. Yeah.
So people who apply. So we are way oversubscribed to Leaders in Tech. We had 1,300 nominations for 78 spots,
Wow.
72 spots in our latest cohort. Um, and we started out with a cohort of 24, and then we went to a cohort of 36, and then this is for the year-long fellows program. And then the fellows said, but what about my executives? They're not the founder, but I want them to get all this. So then we started these 4-day retreats that were based on kind of a short, it's actually like drinking from a fire hose, version of touchy-feely. And we started doing more and more and more of those. I don't remember how many hundreds of people we've put through those. So, and by the way, when we started, my co-founder, wanted to start this. He came to me. He'd been coming to me for 10 years to Stanford, and I'd been his coach. Actually, his name is Joe Greenstein, and he founded many companies, including Flickster, which he bought, and then he bought Rotten Tomatoes, and then he had a big
Hmm.
exit to Warner Brothers. And when he had his exit, he came to me and said, Carole, why don't you leave Stanford? Let's start a business. Let's bring everything you teach to the Valley. And I said, I'm not leaving Stanford. I love my students. And besides, I'm too old to do a startup. 2 good lessons there. So he kept coming to me. He came to me for almost 10 years, every 6 months, saying, why don't you
Wow.
leave Stanford? Let's start a business. By the way, for all of you who are entrepreneurs out there, that's what it means to be an entrepreneur. And he was just sure that he was onto something. And finally, I was like, and then actually what happened was I got really, really angry at Stanford, not at my students, loved my students, will always love my students, but I got angry at the administration, and I just said I just couldn't stay there anymore. It was just getting too difficult for me to continue to do the job I wanted to do. And so I said to Joe, so then actually I told Stanford I was taking early retirement and I retired. Then he heard that I'd retired. Then he came to me, he's like, okay, well now you don't have the
There he
Stanford,
comes again.
you don't have the Stanford excuse anymore. So, and of course I wasn't intending to like retire from working. I just had been at Stanford long enough that I could retire from Stanford. And I said, but Joe, why would anybody come to something we start like this? Like, who's going to come? He's like, you know, we're going to send emails out to the venture capitalists that we know and a few of the founders we know. And we're going to say, hey, we're starting this thing. If you're interested, apply. We said 2 weeks later, we had, well, no, we said, please send us nominations of people you think might be interested. 2 weeks later, we had 350 nominations. We hadn't even opened our doors. Because I had said, well, maybe we'll start with 12, 350 nominations. So then I said, well, who knows how many of these people are going to apply? Well, 180 of them applied. And then the rest said, I can't apply this year, but can I apply next year? So then I said to Joe, I guess this is what they call product market fit. And so then,
Nailed it, you guys. That's
and then we
amazing.
were off to the races. Yeah.
This is Leaders in Tech. And what year was this when you had this idea and launched?
2017 is when he
Oh,
came to me. January of 2018 is when we launched. And if
wow.
you go to
Yeah.
www.leadersintech.org, you'll see a list of all the companies, of all the CEOs and founders that have been through our program, many of which are now unicorns. We estimate that our CEO founders companies are now worth over $1 billion. No, a billion would be, they're all worth over $1 billion, even as they are now. So, yeah.
I always have this saying that like people that diss these human essential elements as soft skills, yeah, whatever soft skills is these soft skills that make the hard things work in life.
That's exactly right. David and I wrote a paper called Soft Skills Are the Hardest.
And they make the hard things work. So do
Yeah.
you again in Leaders in Tech emphasize on the same foundation of what you taught at
It's all
Stanford?
about soft skills. And in fact, I know why why I was thinking a billion didn't sound right. If we've got that many unicorns, our founders' companies are now worth $50 billion,
Wow.
some of whom are now unicorns that are worth $1 billion. Well, and by the way, you cannot apply to Leaders in Tech unless you are pre-IPO.
That's your market. Wow. That's
And
so good.
most of our founders you have to have at least raised a substantial seed round, but most of them have raised an A when they start with us.
So, Carol, then what would you attribute? Like, this is such an incredible course, and what you do is like just mind blowing. What would you say are the top things that you emphasize on that really help these people become unicorn leaders and startups and all the stuff that they make it to being?
Yeah. So now let's go back to the 6 characteristics and the
Yeah.
skills that you need. So first of all, these are all founders who believe that people matter. They don't just give lip service to that and then do nothing that demonstrates that people matter. They actually believe that relationships with people are important to being successful in business. And so, first of all, we teach something called appropriate vulnerability or appropriate authenticity. Because when people hear authentic or vulnerable, they think, I've got to tell you everything. That is not what it means. And so, for example, if I'm the CEO and I stand up in front of the troops, and by the way, we've lost market share three months in a row, and I stand up at the all hands and I say, well, we're crushing it. Everything's just great. Half the people in the room know we've lost market share. So now I have no credibility. If I stand up and I say, well, it's probably no secret, we've lost market share 3 months in a row. I have no idea what we're going to do about it. I don't know why it's happening. And I'm not even sure I should be your CEO. Well, that might be authentic and vulnerable, but that is not appropriate. And that is not what we're saying. But if I stand up and I say, okay, gang, not a secret, we've lost market share 3 months in a row. I wish I could stand here and tell you exactly why that's happening and what we're going to do about it. And the truth is, I can't. I've got some ideas, I've got some thoughts, and I have never needed all of you more to help us figure out what's going on. Who would you rather follow? You'd rather follow the third leader, right? And in fact, one of the very first things I introduce at Leaders in Tech is the way I used to teach leadership at Stanford was very different than the way most people teach leadership. Most people study other leaders and look at what did they do? What did they do that worked? What did they do that didn't work? Why did people follow them or not follow them? The question I asked my students to sit in, and the question I always ask my Leaders in Tech student participants to sit in, question that I ask is, why should somebody follow you? Because it doesn't matter why they would follow me. Don't do what I do. What matters is, it doesn't matter why they would follow or not follow Sheryl Sandberg or,
Simon Sinek or whoever. Yeah.
one of the Google troika. It's why would somebody follow you? And so that exploration is what actually arms these leaders with tools, because what they end up in these small groups. And in each small group, there are some people who say, I'd follow you, and some people say, I probably wouldn't. And wouldn't it be fascinating to find out what it is about how you show up that compels these people to follow you and actually makes these people hesitant? And how do you want to broaden your repertoire of the ways that you show up so that you're more likely to have more people want to follow you? So all of that translates into appropriate vulnerability. And
I like that term.
Right. So that is what relates to the first three: becoming known and inviting others to be known. Because, by the way, if there's already a power differential between you and me, and I never disclose anything to you, why would you disclose anything to me and just make the power differential bigger? It's not how it works. Disclosure is reciprocal. You want somebody to be willing to be a little more vulnerable with you, then you're going to have to be a little more vulnerable with them. And if you're in a higher status position, then it's more important for you to start. So the other thing they learned is they learn a lot about giving feedback in ways that build relationship, in ways that demonstrate investment in another person, that the other person hears as, oh, this is because you care about me, not as a slam. And by the way, most people don't know how to do that. Most people have never been taught how to do that.
Not at all.
And underlying all of that is the appropriate use of emotions.
Absolutely, because feedback is a very big one.
I'll give you another great example. So one of my Leaders in Tech alums called me and said, so Carole, a great thing happened. I want to tell you about it. I said, what is it? He said, we missed a big deadline. My engineering team missed a big deadline. I found out about it on a Friday night. And I spent all weekend stewing about it, getting ready to just come into the Monday morning all hands meeting and just blast them. I got angrier and angrier as the weekend went on. And he said, then on Sunday night, I realized that one of the things I learned from you is that anger is a distancing emotion. And anger is often a secondary emotion because there's actually a more core emotion under the anger, which is usually fear or hurt.
Yeah.
And he said, so I realized that what I was really afraid that I was the only person. Well, first of all, I felt disappointed in my team, but I also realized I was really scared. I was afraid that I was the only person who saw this as big a problem as I saw it. So on Monday morning, instead of going in and blasting them, I said, so I spent all weekend really furious at all you all. And then I realized that what I was really scared. And I was scared that I was the only person who was taking this as seriously as I am and saw the potential devastating consequences of missing this deadline. And he said, I have never had, this is his third startup. He said, I have never had a team rally so quickly to fix a problem in the 15 years I've been in business.
That's so profound.
So they learn that.
Very well. Like such deep stuff. And so many people need this work, honestly. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And so, how do you actually help people break the barriers with really difficult people, like people who are cold, people who are aloof, and they just like to create quote unquote trouble, so to
Yeah.
say? Like, how do you
Yeah.
break those barriers with those kinds of people in the workplace or outside?
So the first thing I want to do is I want to put a pin in all those words you just used because they're all labels.
There.
And when we label somebody else from the start, we are not likely to create more connection. Okay.
But how do you notice how behaviorally? How do you see them behave? How do you like
So
pinpoint?
if I notice that when I approach somebody, they don't make eye contact, they don't respond. When I open up and say something to them, they say nothing back. They walk away in the
Yeah.
middle of a sentence. Those would all be behavioral ways of describing at least some of those labels. You have to turn a label into a behavior. So instead of saying somebody is cold, I say, when I express feelings towards you and, care, and I don't get anything back, you say nothing. And that makes me feel, and now you either have to have the book or have taken the course. You go to your vocabulary of feelings, which is in the appendix. How sad is it that we have to create a vocabulary of feelings because people can't even access their feelings?
Yeah. Articulate them exactly.
And so, and when that happens, I feel dismissed. I feel unimportant. I feel uncared for. I feel unseen, unheard. You got to come up with the feeling word
But you got to
because
be vulnerable, right? Which is so hard because you will assume that this person will no way entertain you because they are the way they're being. How do you open up with them then? You just
exactly. Now,
back off.
now, now there's a parallel important step, which is, and in fact, maybe this is the very first step. I always say when somebody behaves in a way that in some way, in whatever way rubs you the wrong way, um, the first thing to do is get curious. Huh, I wonder why that person is reacting that way. I wonder why that person is doing that. I wonder why that person said that. And by the way, I call, in the course, we call that inquiry. Inquiry is the root cause of inquiry is quest. Quest means to be in search of, not know the answer. So don't ask if you think you already know the answer, or if you're just looking to prove a
Yeah.
hypothesis.
Replacing judgment, basically. Yeah, I know.
If you're going to be curious, truly curious, you're going to have to suspend judgment, and you have to be really curious. You know, I notice that, you know, every time we start to have a conversation, uh, within the first couple of minutes, you look off to the distance and you pick up your phone, and I don't,
What's
and
going
we're no
on
longer
there?
making eye contact, and I wonder what's going on.
So it does boil down to like becoming braver, bolder, and being vulnerable. There is no way around this from what you're
There is
saying
no
to me.
way around that. You want to be a
That's
good
where the
leader?
work lies.
If you want to be a good leader, you're going to have to be appropriately vulnerable.
Yeah.
And by the way, I always used to tell my students at Stanford, I tell my participants at Leaders in Tech, good leaders are good learners. And you cannot be a good learner if you're not curious.
Yeah. It's the
And
first.
and being curious is admitting you don't know. And that is vulnerable. Right? That's how
Yeah.
I connect the dots.
True. I mean, in the personal space at least, I would say I am guilty of being passive aggressive. When I notice behavior like that, I'll just back off and start being passive aggressive.
Yeah.
And I find it very hard to open up, let alone becoming more vulnerable. So I guess there's work for me to do in that domain as well.
Well, you know what? It depends on what your goals are. So if I don't care about the relationship, and I don't care about that person, it's work to invest in a relationship. It's easier to dismiss somebody, way easier. And, if I dismiss enough people, then after a while, I get a reputation for being dismissive.
True. Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's just so much to learn from you and such powerful insights here. And picking up from like what we talked about, the crux of it, how would you describe what it means to be an epic being?
Well, that's a great question. I think, um, I think for starters, an effing being cares
Damn right.
and is not afraid to show they care, regardless of whether or not they. And by the way, disclosure. I said earlier, disclosure is reciprocal. Here's what happens: if I hold my cards close, you're going to hold your cards closer. Then I'm going to hold my cards closer. You're going to hold your cards closer. Then neither one of us is going to be playing with anything. So somebody has to make the first move. And an effing being is a person who is willing to make the first move. Now, if I make the first move, and this is why the 15% rule is so important. This is a critically important concept in the course, in the book, at Leaders in Tech. So if we all have our comfort zone, think of 3 concentric circles. Circle in the middle is my comfort zone. I don't think twice about what I say. The circle on the outside is my danger zone. In a million years, I would never say that. But there's a circle in the middle, which is our learning zone. And I don't learn anything new if I stay in my comfort zone. But I also don't learn anything new if I end up in my danger zone because I'm like a deer in headlights and frozen. So you have to get outside your comfort zone into learning. But my students used to say, but Carole, the minute I'm outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? So we came up with this 15% rule. Step a little bit outside your comfort zone. You don't have to go way out, just a little. You'll feel it. You'll feel it in your body. You'll feel it in the palms of your hands, the back of your neck, and your stomach a little bit. And if you only go 15% outside your comfort zone, whether it's with disclosure or feedback, then it's unlikely to result in a disaster because you only went a little bit outside. And you're unlikely to freak the other person out or freak yourself out because you only went a little bit outside. And then what happens is your comfort zone, if all goes well, gets a little bit bigger, 15% bigger. Now you have a slightly bigger comfort zone with that person. Now you can experiment going 15% beyond that. And that is how we grow relationships, little bit at a time.
Such a brilliant model. I love that. Such a
We don't
powerful
go from
model.
0 to 100 in 2.3 seconds, right? The other thing I often say is, if you're new to all this, don't start with the most difficult person in your life who you've never been able to connect with. Don't give feedback to the person in your life who's just been bugging you for 15 years and you've never been able to figure out what to say. Start with somebody. Again, it ought to be, any of those would be way beyond 15% to make any headway at all. So start with
Right.
somebody that you can go 15% with,
Yeah.
that you're
Not with the
already,
familiar. Yeah.
yeah. Get your sea legs, as we say.
So where would you like people to find you? Like, is there a way to reach out to you? I know I'll put the show notes like Leaders in Tech and your program, but like where else would you like people to check out
So
your work?
Leaders in Tech, which is a .org, the book website, www.connectandrelate.com. That has a bunch of old podcasts. It's got a bunch of articles. It has free downloadable, that's got an assessment that you can download for free and take it, give it to people that know you and see how you see yourself and compare it to how other people see you. I thought I was a pretty good listener and everybody else thinks I'm a terrible listener. It's got a free downloadable start your own learning group with step-by-step. You can use you need the book, but you can do step by step, create your own learning group. We have, and then in beta, about to launch, well, actually launched, but in beta, is Carole Robin AI.
Okay, very cool.
So Carole Robin AI, the irony of creating an AI that's going to teach people how to connect with each
Correct.
other is not lost on me, okay?
It's the future. It's the future. So you gotta make happen. Yeah.
But Carole Robin AI, unlike, I mean, you can go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, what does Carole Robin say? What does Carole Robin say about giving feedback? And I've done that. 30 to 40% of it is wrong. It's just
Wow.
wrong.
I wonder where they got it from.
Because what they do is they go and the ChatGPT looks at the universe of everything online, and it puts together what they think, whatever has Carole Robin, whatever has feedback, whatever, right? Well, it doesn't get it right. Whereas Carole Robin AI was created with only my materials. Every article I've ever written, every podcast I've ever done, my book, lectures I've done, everything, and nothing else. So what you get is pure Carole Robin. And
Amazing. That's such an exciting project.
yeah, so I don't remember what happens if I think if I don't know, I will send you the link for that.
Please
Because
do.
because I think if you just put in Carole Robin AI, you get the YouTube little intro video to Carole Robin AI, and you don't get anything else. So
I'll check it out. But this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Carol, for being here. And you're just so all the work you're doing is just mind blowing. The
well,
world needs this.
right back at you. The
Yeah,
world needs more people like you, and your generation needs more people like you. I
I'll
mean,
try.
my question to you is how do we reach your generation with more of this message? Because that's where that's why I was so invested in my students at Stanford. And the average age of our leaders in tech, or it's a little older, they're in their mid to late 30s. But what about the 20-something-year-olds? How do we get to them? Because by the time, I mean, I'm afraid of what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Truly
Yeah,
afraid.
same.
Because nobody's reinforcing messages about, to your point, humanity, people being at the crux of it all. And pretty soon AIs are going to be talking to AIs, and the people are going to, it's like I told the developer of my AI, I said, because he said, we could have your AI generate your LinkedIn posts. I was like, I am not doing that. Because
Ditto.
pretty soon
Yeah.
my AI is going to be generating my post, and your AI is going to be reading it, and no human being is ever going to be involved in this. What is
No,
that?
we need more awareness, Carol. Let's do this. We need more awareness around the world for this stuff. Yeah, it's like pretty concerning.
And
Definitely.
and I will leave you with this thought, which is it's a challenge because somewhere along the line, somebody has to teach young people to value relationships. And if you don't value relationships, none of what you and I are talking about matters. If all you value is amassing great wealth, uh, gaining power, then none of this. You're going to think, I don't care. But the irony is, you might end up very rich or very powerful and very miserable.
Could not agree more.
I figured I was preaching to the choir with you.
Yeah, could not agree more. But yeah, work to do for sure.